Welcome to Complete and Cast, the official podcast of Complete and Box Video Games. I'm your host Spencer, and today we have episode 17, all things adventure games, with our special guest, Parker Lindstrom. Parker, how are you?
Hello, official. I feel very official being on this official podcast.
Well, the one time that you were on the unofficial one, and we had to send you that cease and desist, was
true.
A little ridiculous.
Hey, GHK puts on a really good unofficial podcast, and I really think that you should let him do more.
Listen, my lawyers have nothing to do with it. They just just send them. They send them. I tell them not to, but they just do it. It is what it is. So today we are here talking about adventure games. What is an adventure game? It's a game where you adventure, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of what defines it would be that it would be a game that doesn't focus on, twitchy, action-y type stuff, where you don't have to, do things in a certain instant. I mean, sometimes there's timing puzzles, but for the most part, you're not, talking about, shooting something or attacking something and that kind of thing. So, I think that's key. I think also, an in-depth story. But again, as we'll go over, adventure games were sort of a precursor and lasted a long time. So there's a lot of adventure games in everything that we play now, So it's sort of a weird genre to discuss.
And it's changed a lot over the years too.
Right.
So let me first get something off my chest. In episode 16, I talked with Chris Klump about Fallout, and I knew nothing about Fallout. I have to say one thing first about adventure games. Not only have I never ever beaten the game Myst,
right.
I am fairly confident that I have never completed a single puzzle in that game in full. To be fair, my Sega Saturn copy, by the way, I played on Sega Saturn back in the day. Literally, and then this is before I started collecting. This is being 10 years old or whatever.
Right.
Was significantly scratched that at certain points it would mess up.
Right.
But I'm not going to use that as an excuse because it was still messed up anyway. So I'm sorry that I failed you and everyone in terms of adventure games, but that's why we're here today. We're here to learn.
Look, Myst is an interesting game because Myst is was at the time the highest selling computer game of all time when it came out, and stayed that way for quite a number of years, 5 years actually, I think. So I think the next thing that beat it might have been Half-Life, and then it's still on the list of most selling. It's still number 13 or 14 or something. It's 6 million units or something. Obviously overtaken by things like World of Warcraft and Diablo and Minecraft and stuff like that. But that being said, it also, even though it's the top title and the one everybody thinks of, it basically was the last, the nail in the coffin for the what you would call strict adventure game. When that came out and it proved that there was this awesome 3D spaces that you could move around in, within a year, Quake came out. And then from that point on, everybody wanted 3D graphics, and they wanted you moving around, and they wanted you fighting. Tomb Raider came out soon after. Resident Evil came out soon after. And then that was it for games like Myst, where it was a lot of thinking, because games like Resident Evil and Tomb Raider had the elements of an adventure game in them. So they scratched that itch for a lot of people, as well as also having this other content of running around shooting zombies, or running around dual wielding pistols, whatever. So they ended up kind of opening up that world. So then adventure games, as it were, kind of that's when the boom of adventure games died out. So Myst is sort of the last title, the last major title.
And I never really thought about it that way, but I'm a huge Resident Evil fan, as you know, and you're right. You'll have, they try to mix in elements of the puzzles and stuff like that, whereas a game like Myst sometimes is a bit too puzzle-only for someone like me, where, I mean, that's a really good point, and I never thought Myst was 94 or something like that.
Myst is 93, yeah.
Okay, 93, and at that point, that was if we're looking at console games, we have the Sega CD, and the Sega Saturn's not even out yet, so 3D was still not really a thing.
Right.
And if it was on consoles, it was terrible.
Yeah.
It was really bad.
Yeah.
So that's actually a good point. If you're looking now in video game years, or in real life years, this is not much, but if you're looking 1 or 2 years until the PlayStation comes out, it's it's huge. You start seeing all these 3D stuff. I don't think I ever put that together actually like that. So
Right.
let's back up a little bit. I do want to get back to that Myst, because we're going to talk about the end of adventure games. But let's go back to the beginning of adventure games. I mean, you've been playing adventure games for a long time. So what were your first experiences in the genre?
Well, definitely. I unfortunately, Adventure Colossal Caves is like, late 70s. So I was like way too, I wasn't even born yet. So I didn't get to experience it like as it was coming out. But my earliest, adventure game playthroughs were definitely text-based. So, Infocom games were like, huge. They were kind of the pinnacle at that point. There was a lot of, Adventure was like, there was Adventure International or something like that. They're the ones that put out like, Adventure and those games. But, Infocom is the ones that put out like Zork, the Zork series, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Bureaucracy, like a lot of other games that are just text-based. So they would be like, Zork is just like, the first thing that pops up on your screen is just, you are outside of a house. There is a mailbox. The directions are north, south, east, and west. And then you tell the computer what you want to do. Go north, go east, go west, that kind of thing. And you explore the world. And so it's all text-based. So you have to kind of build your own maps, like a lot of times, like, you would have like these notebooks next to you at all times, so you could kind of, draw your map and stuff and kind of figure out, because there was times where you'd go into a room and then you'd go back the way you came, but then it was a different area and you were like, oh, and so you had to kind of like, really maze it out.
So was there backtracking in these games?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like Zork for sure, there was like times when you had to go. And then there was times when you had to go and get an item and go back, and it's definitely
you're talking like, just imagine being in like a house. You're talking like you have to go through 3 rooms to get a key, and then go back through the same 3, or possibly to a different place too. So you literally would have to draw it out. Like there's no way you could remember. No. Oh yeah, I went north and west, then north and west. It's like not.
Yeah, like I will say, I did know some people that could do it visually, and like. I've read that like they games like that were a huge hit with like the blind community, because like suddenly there was all these games that were like, oh, I don't have to see anything, like I'm just like they have computers that tell them what what the text is, and so then they just were playing that way.
And would you say that Zork, to me, that's the most famous one of that?
Yeah, Adventure like was the first, but Adventure like. Adventure was more popular if you happen to be like a computer nerd in the late 70s. Like then you played Adventure, because it was like, it wasn't sold, it was like shared. It was like one of probably the first cases of like shareware, but it was literally like a guy made it, left it behind when he quit a job, and then somebody else shared it with their IT department, and it went around the universities, and then somebody else got a hold of it, and then like made it into like an actual fantasy thing. Like at first it was just like exploring a cave, and there was like nothing that actually happens. You just kind of like pick up treasures and stuff. Then this other guy, Don Woods, got a hold of it, and he made it like you see a dwarf, like there's an axe, that kind of thing, and you actually like fought things and picked up treasure and gained points and all that stuff. So like Zork was like the first like commercial release
that your average non-super nerd would be like,
right,
oh, I have a computer, I can play this kind of thing.
Exactly, because it was like, oh wow, and they like definitely when they first wrote Zork, they wrote it and they finished it, and then they realized it was way too big for the computers at the time, so they literally had to split it into 3 games. So that's why there's Zork 1, 2, and 3. Now it ended up working in their favor, because they had like a trilogy right off the bat, and since Zork 1 sold so well, they were able to like immediately go into the sequel, and everybody was eating it up. So I definitely played Zork, and some of those, like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was another text-based one that was great. Douglas Adams wrote the book, and he worked on that series, worked on the text game. He was like all about those text games, to the point where I think he had ideas of like making a novel that would be only consumed via text-based game, where like all the content in the book he would write in a game, and then you would experience it through the game. And so like you basically, every time you did something right, you would get another like chapter or part of the book.
Well, in a way, these text-based adventures remind me of, and I do have to explain something out there for our younger, I can't believe I have to say this nowadays, our younger audience out there. There's these books called Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Absolutely.
And
Very
essentially
similar.
what they are is you go to page 1 and it's like, you see a room, take left or right. Left, page 2, right, page 100, right? And you choose it and you go, and left will be like, oh, you died, whatever. Right is, oh, you saved the world, whatever. So these,
and I will
you can
say,
clearly see.
I would be interested to see what the timing is, but I'm pretty sure the books were probably based on the games.
That would be
I'm sure
interesting
the books
to see.
came out afterwards, because the games, like there wasn't like everything, like Adventure. That very first title was made by a guy who liked to go caving, and he like just wanted to create his experience on the computer. And like he came up with the idea of inputting commands and getting like an output. And like it was kind of revolutionary at the time. So like that was wholly original. So I'm very positive that the Choose Your Own Adventure came out afterwards, when it was like, oh, we can kind of make this into a book form,
And my experience is from the Nintendo ones from the mid-'80s, which is clearly way after that. Right. So that would be interesting to see. Now, we mentioned, obviously, the systems that these played on computers.
Right.
When you were first playing Zork and all that, what kind of a computer were you playing on?
So I had, I would go to my cousin's, and he had my uncle worked at Bell Telephone, and he... which is like a precursor to like AT&T or something. Like it was like a major like telecommunications corporation that like doesn't. I'm sure they merged with somebody and whatever. But yeah, Bell was like they were like the top. But so he always had cutting edge computer stuff, because he either had to have it for work or he just bought it because he was a computer nerd. So I would play it a lot there. I wouldn't be able to tell you what I was playing it on, because I was too young to like understand that. But my mom bought us a Hewlett Packard from like Sears or something when I was probably like 8, 7, something like that. And then that's what we had at the house. And so that was like where I played a lot of games on that. And that was like there were some graphical games, but as far as adventure games, there really wasn't anything until like the mid to late 80s was when like the first 83 or 84 was when the first like graphical one came out.
Now the first games you were playing, were they floppy disk?
Yeah, they were all like floppy based. Like that's how you would get anything at that point. But yeah, it was pretty. You'd have like 3 or 4 discs for each game or whatever.
And I mean that brings me to my next point. It's so interesting to see. We're not talking a million years ago, where it's like, I had to go to my. I mentioned this with Chris in a previous episode. It's I had to go to my cousin's house because they had a computer. We didn't. Right. And so it's like, now that our phones are essentially supercomputers, everyone has a supercomputer in their pocket at all times. Mm-hmm. It's hard to imagine a time where they were this primitive. For instance, for me, I remember when playing PC games meant I had to boot up MS-DOS in the mid-90s, and it's impossible to imagine, and I must say that, like, the first computers I had, we had floppies, but it was like Windows, whatever was before 95. That was in general what I had, or maybe it was
3.1.
Yeah, or maybe 95, but I never had like the old school whatever pre-Windows stuff.
Right.
So it was MS-DOS, which compared to the stuff we're talking about is rather fancy. Mm-hmm. So do you like when you went from say these adventure games to the stuff that's starting to become graphical? Or the MS-DOS games. Do you have any particular experience of like the wow factor or just the evolution?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the adventure games as they were, like there were some graphical games while there was text-based games, but they were like, like your Pac-Man type style, where it's like Space Invaders, that kind of thing. So it wasn't like, so there was that going on, but then in the mid 80s, Sierra became a thing. Although at first it was called like Online or something, and they started merging the idea of graphics and text, and so that like they obviously Sierra is what like King's Quest series, Police Quest, Space Quest, and all those. Leisure Suit Larry and all those like great classics. But they started out like there was the very first game they made was like Mystery House. I remember playing that like in like middle school. Now this would have been like years after it came out, but it was like one of the few games that were on the computer at the computer lab. It was this game called Mystery House, and we would just like, I mean, it was one step above the text adventure because it would be like, like you're in a room, and instead of just having a text where it says you're in a room, it was these like horrible vector graphics, which at the time, like, I don't know,
black and white.
Oh yeah, it was like very similar to like that old Star Wars game, but like that level of graphic, where it's just like these line drawings, and it would be like you're at this house, and then you open the door, and the door like opened, and you were like, oh my god, like it was. I mean, it's silly to think about it being revolutionary, but you were just like, holy crap. And times when like some of these games like King's Quest, when the first King's Quest came out, it was like, it can't get any better than this. Like, it's
always been the case with games. It can't get any better than this.
Oh my gosh, like this is amazing. And like that, I mean, it was still, you were entering text commands, but it was still like, it was like amazing. Like it was like, there was so much animation in it that you were like, wow, like
unique death animations in King's Quest and all
everything. And and the humor in a lot of adventure games carried through constantly. There was always this kind of like fun lightheartedness to it, where like they would have fun with it, where like like in Leisure Suit Larry, there would even be like, depending on what you typed in, they were prepared. Now a lot of times with text adventures, the thing that falls apart is if you don't know like what words the
I don't know what up is. I don't know what left is.
Exactly. Yep. It's whatever's programmed in. So if you're not using the right language, or like if you're saying like take instead of get, you could be like getting very frustrated. But like once you figure out like what the game's looking for, then it becomes easy. But I remember like in like Leisure Suit Larry, you of course, because it's like kind of, it was like at the time, like, I mean, it's very tame, but at the time it was like, ooh, I'm playing this game like without my parents knowing. It was like very raunchy. But like, so of course you immediately want to, I mean, and it happens with every text-based adventure, you immediately want to type in every curse word to see what it does, and
don't know how to F myself.
Right. And it would say things like, you would want to do that, or like, what would your mother think, or something like that, because they knew full well that that's what you would do. So it was kind of funny. But yeah, that was pretty great when they started getting like King's Quest and those graphical type games like started like really pushing the envelope, and that was exciting.
So we're getting to the point in the history of adventure games, if we're looking at console games, which are my wheelhouse, although there were many, many games beforehand,
right,
it's pretty clear that you look at Super Mario Brothers, the original one, as the turning point.
Right.
It was the point where, there were games that weren't just single games before, but It was the point where it all came together, it all became popular, it all just became a thing and revolutionized games. Is there one game that did that for adventure games?
It probably would be like maybe like Monkey Island, Secret of Monkey Island, because that was like one. I mean, there was a few point and click adventures before that, but and one of the early ones was done by LucasArts, Labyrinth, but that was like the movie tie-in game, but like it didn't really do well because the movie didn't do well, like in theaters. I mean, it's a cult classic, but it didn't like...
I guess to expunge my question real quick, it's Mario Brothers, although it might not be the best game back then, it was the game that got people into it. Right. Is there a game that got people, your average person, oh, let's get this game because we have a computer?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, some of the games I talked about before, like King's Quest and some of those, like they did... get people to buy a computer because it was like, whoa, what is this? What's happening over here? That for sure. Myst definitely did that for CD-ROM.
Yeah, we're talking 10 years later, but
yeah. But that's
that's a very good point.
That was a much bigger like impact because Myst definitely was like I mean, if Myst doesn't happen, I don't know that CD-ROM like gets where it got to, because you don't have that instant like adoption, like because for a game that sells that wildly successful in the very first year, like that's like amazing. That just did amazing wonders for like the adoption idea. And on top of it, the move to like DVD-ROM some years later was also a lot easier because of how Myst did it. It was like, look how much better this is going to be. So when DVD-ROM came along, it was like, oh, we will gladly adopt this because we know full well it's going to be a much better experience. Like, whereas if you don't have a huge game like that, then it's really hard to get people to be like, well, what the heck? It just holds more space. Who cares? Like, what can you do for me? You know, when they show you what they can do, it's like, okay.
But when you see Myst with actual video, not just good graphics, but people acting in actual video, it's huge.
Yeah.
I think we're getting into my next subject. So if you look at a subject like RPGs, a lot of people would say the golden era of it would be like Super Nintendo, Final Fantasy 2 and 3, and Chrono Trigger, yada yada. Is there a certain age that you would consider the golden age of adventure games?
Yeah, definitely. Like in the late 80s, early 90s, when that graphical stuff was at its peak. I mean, you had like the Sierra was pumping them out, like all the Quest series, but
and all the Monkey Islands.
But then that's when LucasArts came along, and they were a small company, and they all of a sudden. So what happened with LucasArts was they worked really hard on this game called Maniac Mansion, and they went to put it out, and the publisher backed out. They got cold feet and said, this looks weird. We don't like the idea. We're not going to go for it. And so they were like, well, what do we do? So LucasArts as a division decided that they would have faith that their people made a good game, and they put it out themselves. And that's how LucasArts became like a publisher.
And that I'm going to guess that company that didn't publish it probably went under pretty fast.
Yeah, and probably regretted that decision for a long time.
I mean, it's like Blockbuster not buying Netflix.
Oh, absolutely. So it just, I mean, that, what a bad decision. But, so, LucasArts coming onto the scene, with the Scum, engine basically at the time, the scripting engine, which stood for it's like scripting something for Maniac Mansion. It's basically it was made for Maniac Mansion, it was great. And then every game after that, what LucasArts was a huge success. I mean, even the movie tie-in, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, there was a movie tie-in, and that did well. And then going from that, then you had Monkey Island, and then and then that brought on Tim Schafer, and then of course he did some amazing games.
And this is perfect because this was actually my next subject. I guess it just I'm just very good at coming up with these subjects, obviously.
Absolutely.
So I mean, it was LucasArts. Now, when I think of adventure games, although there's many other ones, and you have Myst is the first one I think of, but when I think of a whole genre, I think of LucasArts.
Right.
So what is it that made their games so good?
Well, one thing was that it was point and click. Sierra did the point and click late in the King's Quest series, King's Quest 5 or 6 or something like that, and actually King's Quest, when it did its big when it's did its big graphical overhaul and was look at this brand new style, that's when Monkey Island came out, and it was kind of blown away. Monkey Island was just so much more wildly successful, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that it was point and click, and on top of it, all of the commands were on the screen, so you didn't have to try to figure out what they were going for. On top of it, a lot of them Maniac Mansion, Day of the Tentacle, and all those, they would also do a great idea where it was putting solutions to puzzles close to the puzzle. There was always this idea, in the Sierra games, where you had to pay attention to everything, because there'd be some small detail on the far side of the map that you'd have to either remember to get at the right time, or you'd have to somehow connect a dot. And while that was fun, it got tedious after a while, to the point where Maniac Mansion and those were okay, look, you're playing this because you want to have fun and have this adventure storytelling and all this stuff. But like, you don't have to make it ridiculous. Like, you don't have to add tedium to it. Like, let's just make it like, you know, there's these fun puzzles that you have to solve, but, you know, like, they're right there. And on top of it, Maniac Mansion started the idea of you don't really die per se. Like, you know, in like the Sierra games, there was like this thing where you would do something and then your character would die and you would be upset because you'd have to like, you know, load a file, and if you didn't like save very often, it was like, dang it, I gotta go do all that again, that kind of thing. So like Maniac Mansion was this idea where it's like, look, you're playing this game because you think it's fun and you want to have a story, but like, we're not gonna kill you. We're just gonna like, you know, like give you like a different ending. You know what I mean? Whatever. And there was also not the like kind of like annoying thing where it was like, oh, you forgot to do that. Switch that one switch in the beginning of the game, and you've now locked yourself out of the game. You know, like it definitely was like a little bit more forgiving in that sense, where, you know, and the replayability of like, you know, a Maniac Mansion is so high with all the different like, you know, storylines you can play through. You can play as each different character in the story, and same with Day of the Tentacle, whatever. And like, so that was just a great, like, I mean, they just did it a lot better than anybody else was doing it at the time.
Do you have a favorite LucasArts game in general?
I mean, I probably would say Maniac Mansion only because I pumped a ton of hours on the NES with that. I mean, I never played that one on the computer. I only ever played it on the NES.
Still, for a NES game, it's really in depth.
Yeah,
and we'll talk about that more later. But it was very in depth for that one.
Yeah.
So when I think of LucasArts, the first thing I think of is the humor.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure.
I think that,
and that was true for most adventure games. Like even from the text games, they always had this idea, because they were basically these computer nerds that were like, you know, like they all grew up like reading like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and all this like fun science fiction that was, you know, also funny. So they were like, you know, that was kind of injected in it from the beginning, you know. So there wasn't many. There were some, but there wasn't many that were like super serious.
Do you have a particular moment from, I would say, either LucasArts or any games in general that you just like will always remember as being like caught you off guard and was funny, or just funny in general?
Yeah, Monkey Island was always, I always enjoyed in Monkey Island, like there was this whole concept of the like, the sword fighting was like this insult sword fighting. So like they would always like, the way it would work is like the character you were sword fighting would say something negative against you, and you had to think of like the correct like comeback. So, and it would be related to it. So it'd be like, you fight like a dairy farmer, and the response would be something along the lines of like, well, that's good because you fight like a cow or something, you know, like, and back and forth. And so like, you know, it was always fun, like, to try to figure out what those jokes were, you know, and like, and, you know, and sometimes you would like, the combinations wouldn't work, but they might be funnier on their own just because it was like, you know, whatever. But yeah, I always liked the humor in that one for sure. But I mean, they're all, I mean, Grim Fandango is hilarious. I mean, you can't play that game and not like enjoy yourself the whole time. I mean, it's just excellent.
Oh no, I absolutely agree. And not only were these games so humorous, but they're also, a good adventure game is also very in-depth. Honestly, I find that many of the best moments of these games, for instance, microwaving the hamster in Maniac Mansion, which I think is not in the...
It's just like a fun little
thing to do. So it's something that... It's something... Yeah, fun. Yeah.
But so, yeah, it's definitely hilarious.
And this might not be to your average, or to your hardcore one, but to the average person like me, that's the one thing I think of when I think of Maniac Mansion, just because I know it's a thing that you can do. It's the most famous moment. Because of that, there's a lot of stuff that you can miss in these good adventure games.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Have you ever found out about a particular moment, funny or not, far after you played the game?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I know...
And especially, we're talking, this is before you could go on YouTube and watch a Let's Play, or even go to GameFAQs. So you would your friend would have to say, you know, did you microwave the hamster?
Right. What? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a lot of hours sunk into those games. So like, we definitely tried like everything we possibly could think of. But yeah, I mean, I would like to go back and read up, because I'll honestly, that's kind of what happened, is that like I I haven't like gone back and read like every single Easter egg that's in some of those games that I used to play. So like I'd be interested to read them and be like, oh whoa, I totally didn't see.
And
that.
you play these games 50
must,
times, and
absolutely.
it's like, oh my gosh, I never knew that.
Yeah, I mean it'd be like having sunk like 80 hours into like Final Fantasy 7, and then have somebody be like, oh, did you ever beat those weapons or whatever? And be like, wait, what? Like it's totally be like, I never even knew that was a thing. You'd be like, what? So I mean, I would be interested to see if there was anything, just considering how much time I put in them, but or conversely, if I'm like, oh no, I did get it all. That
would be interesting if you found like an Easter egg that you're like is not very common, and you're like, man, I found that just messing around.
Right.
So if we're sticking in the realm of, now let's make this fair, a good adventure game, not like a terrible piece of garbage.
Right.
What is the hardest adventure game that you have ever played? Obviously I say fair because you can play a broken game and it's hard.
Absolutely. Well, there was a great right before Myst, they started doing the whole video like full motion video type thing. Where it was like not animation, like there was this full motion video happening on the screen, and there was this game that was in the Zork series called Return to Zork, and it was like similar to Myst, where you move around static places, but then when you would be somewhere, there might be a person there, and they would talk to you. They'd be like, hey, like blah blah blah, and the something that you could do in that game was at any point, especially once you get the like sword or something, at any point you could kill any single character in the whole game. So you could walk into a room and be like, hey, and then you would click on them with the sword.
These non-playable characters.
Right, and you'd click on them with the sword, and they'd be like, oh, what have you done? And they'd all have these death animations. And some of them you did have to kill because of whatever reason, but for the most part you didn't. And so the temptation to do so was high because you're like a kid and you're like, oh my god, this is so fun. But it made it like next to impossible to like complete the game then, because there was a lot of times where you'd have to find out information from certain people or whatever, or get an item from that person and they'd be dead. And very similar to like, the Skyrim and, all the Bethesda games, they have cases where you can like wipe out storylines by killing a certain character. And you're like, well, I gotta restart from a save because I'm not gonna be able to complete the game. So that was definitely tough, because it was just like, like just knowing what to do at what time and that kind of thing for sure.
Stuff that wipes out storylines is always
absolutely.
The toughest.
Always. King's Quests and the Sierra games, Police Quest, Space Quest, they were always very tough because, again, you had to remember every little detail. There were stuff that was, once you completed it, it was like very clever. Like you're like, oh, that's clever, but like you would never have thought of it, and it was just like, so it just took like playing it over and over, like, and just kind of like guessing, it definitely was like, difficult on that. And that's what they were there for. A lot of adventure games don't, one of the reasons that, they're still around, but like the boom of them has died out is because, especially when you have something like the internet where you can just look up the solution to everything, like this generation wouldn't be able to sit through a game.
So let me go into that really quick. Parker and I have been sharing, and this is so dumb, Ashley calls them old lady games.
Right.
Those escape room games on your phone.
But it's definitely, it's Myst. It's just Myst in a different format.
Right.
Like,
so I find fun with them, when I'm tired at night, play with them for a couple minutes, whatever. That's what they're meant for.
Yeah.
But I find it that like if I'm on one of these ones for more than like 5 minutes,
right,
I cannot help but I just look it up.
Exactly.
And it just is what it is. And sometimes, like, and I hate to say it, and I'm just a pleb when it comes to this, you go to, like, a particular puzzle, and it's so complicated. And it's not, like, the ones that I hate are, like, the move, say you have, like, a 9 or 3x3 square, and you have to move one piece around. The tiles thing. Games. And that stuff is, like, ugh.
Right. It's like, I didn't play this when I had the chance when I was a kid. Like, I don't want to play it on my phone.
Right. I like the ones where it's, like, find item, use item here because whatever.
In a way that sort of seems intuitive, but in a way is like different thinking outside of the box.
Oh, the wire cutters don't have to be used on wires. They can be used on this lock, whatever. Right. Exactly. So I find that fun. But anyway, I find it super hard to like just be like, I'm just going to sit here and focus on it.
Oh, yeah.
I just instantly, I'm like, YouTube.
That's why it doesn't work. Myst doesn't work in a world where you have instant gratification. I mean, Myst was like hours of my life sunk into Myst, was just trying to like figure out the puzzles and like kind of go through them, and like if somebody was able to tell me them like 5 minutes after I hit a speed bump, it would be like the dumbest. I mean, it would, like it would be ruined. Like you wouldn't be able to play it, like it would just be like, oh, all right, that's fine. Like you would not get no enjoyment out of it because you'd just be like, oh, okay. Yeah. It's like, the answer is 2, 3, 4. Oh, okay, great.
I also have to say, when we're talking about those old lady games, and this is amazing. I love sharing these because, like, sometimes, like, I'll message him and I'll be like, I found the worst escape room game ever. And I'll be like, you gotta look this up. And it'll be, like, the worst.
Yeah.
And then in the rare case where we find, and these, you can put, I assume that anybody can put up any game they make, like, it's just whatever. These are free games. But, like, the off chance, like, we found this one that was, like, 5 huge sprawling levels long. I was like, oh, dude, I found one that's not, like, the worst thing of all time. So I find that super interesting. When you find such a bad one that you're like, I cannot even play this game for free.
Yeah,
for, like,
right, exactly. Like, I'm not even paying for this, and I'm already annoyed.
Delete within 5 minutes. So we were talking about hard games. When I think of hard and adventure games, and I must admit I've never played this one. I've only watched Let's Plays of it. I think of Day of the Tentacle.
Yeah,
you're talking a LucasArts game with time hopping.
Right.
I mean, so have you had experience with that one, or?
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, I've played all the LucasArts games to some extent. I don't remember. I don't think I ever beat it at the time. I definitely remember playing through it like on an emulator, like much later, But like, I definitely didn't beat that when it came out. But yeah, I mean, that one's tough. But the thing about LucasArts games is that in general, you can't die. So like, you at least are like, can keep like trying things or whatever. So, you can sort of like, muscle your way through things after a while. Cause even if you just are like, like sometimes you resort to in the escape room games is where you're just clicking on like literally everything you can in the room, or like people say the same thing happens with like Professor Layton and some of those ones where it's just like click, they just clicking. Well,
especially when it's not
possible.
Especially in these ones where it's not obvious. Like I hate to say it, but like make the items that you can click a little brighter. So like on these ones where I literally just click everywhere, and like sometimes I'll look up, it's like, I'll look up the answer and it'll be like, oh, did you click at this exact spot? And it's like if I would have done it, I would have had it because I had the item to use there. But it's like, did you click next to the bed? It's like I thought sure I did.
I clicked everywhere. Must have just missed that 1 millimeter space.
Dude, that half the time when I look it up, I'm like, seriously. And I feel so dumb for looking it up.
Absolutely.
But you're like, how? I have a bed sheet and there's a bed, but I clicked on the bed and it didn't let me do anything.
You gotta click near the pillow. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Great.
No, that happens all the time. So to go back from the phone, which is pretty much all they are anymore, adventure games.
Well, no, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I mean, unfortunately, adventure games are still being carried on the torch with Telltale. So Telltale.
Oh, I never even put those into the adventure games.
Yeah. So Telltale's definitely Telltale is basically LucasArts when it dissolved. The group was working on a new Sam and Max game. And then LucasArts dissolved, and the project got canceled. And then Telltale, they were like, let's make our own game studio. And so they started with the Sam and Max episodic series. And then ever since then, that was wildly successful. And then everyone since then has been pretty successful.
And if you look at it, it's surprising that they are as still successful as they are.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, people I know will, be complaining about the length of time it's taking for the new Walking Dead episode.
Sounds like me,
right? But plenty of friends I posted on Facebook where it's like, oh, I finally got caught up on the Walking Dead, Telltale games, and now it's gonna be 3 years till the next one comes out, and they get all and it's like, but they definitely have figured out a way to make it, viable, in the current generation with the games that are out now, but also the storyline is in depth, and the way you interact with the characters is kind of innovative, where there's these conversations you can have, and they'll like change how a character reacts to you. And there's like, rather than have like one final ending that can be changed based on like what you do, there's like these mini endings throughout the game that can change. So you can like not save a certain person or save a certain person. And
I always imagine when these, because the Telltale's a great company at this.
Right.
I always imagine when they're sitting there in their meeting room and they have the, I don't know what you call it, the story tree,
right.
Set up, like how it would look like episode 1 story tree. You do this, then this, then this, and this. Like it must be like so complex,
absolutely.
And that's why like I will always like. There's not a bunch in terms of gameplay that comes with these games, and that like as this is one of those things.
And they come out as episodes,
right.
and then you're done in like no time at
right.
all.
And one of the things with having a story, people will be like, they'll bring up the Walking Dead Telltale game, and it just says The Walking Dead by Telltale, and if you don't know what that is, they'll be like, and you just have to be like, this is kind of an adventure game. This is kind of whatever.
You're not going to run around killing zombies.
Right.
Like, that's what you might want in your head, but you need to pick up Dying Light or something.
But I totally understand why it takes so long for them to come out, because it's like, it's complicated stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't want an adventure game where it's like A, then B, then C, then D. I want like, no. I let this character die, so then a little bit later, it's like, boy, I sure could have used that 6'3", muscle guy to lift this car, and because I don't have that guy, this other character dies.
Right.
And it's so interesting. I gotta say, I have not played the other ones, although I heard that they're all very good. Yep. But The Walking Dead absolutely has me hooked. I know the third one is out now. I think just the first episode, and I am that pleb that is like, I'm not playing. Right. I'm not playing the first episode. Yeah. I just gotta wait, because like that's one of the few games my wife, and I know this sounds crazy, is not super into games. Probably because I come home from having a game store and I'm like, she's like, you want to play games? No.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
but I still play games and everything. But she's not super into them. But when the new Walking Dead comes out, she'll be like, "Oh, is that the one with Clementine or whatever?" And it's like, yeah, we're about to do this. Oh, and like, and this is not to go into any like super spoilers or anything, but that shows how good that Telltale is by getting me invested in these characters. Where nowadays, I got to admit, like when I play a game, I'm like, it's like the Grand Theft Auto type of thing where you're like, that character died. But it's like when something happens to like Kenny or whatever in Walking Dead, you're like. And the crazy thing about that is these games aren't that long, but that character has evolved so much. Better than the TV show.
Yeah.
and it's like, wow, this is like a video game where like I'm not even playing as him. And he's evolved so much, and I'm like, no, what's happening to him? That really goes to show you.
Yeah, and Tim Schafer is still doing it, working hard. He released Broken Age, which was like a huge success, kickstarted and all that, and that was super fun. And he's also been slowly re-releasing his LucasArts games. So like he did Grim Fandango remaster, and he's working on a Full Throttle remaster, and he's going to be doing all those again. So they'll be coming out. But yeah, Broken Age is excellent. I highly recommend that. And that was just in the last like 10 years Tim Schafer released that. So I think they're still out there. And the guys that worked on Maniac Mansion and those very early LucasArts games are putting out a game they kickstarted a few years ago called Thimbleweed Park, which is supposed to be coming out this year, I think. Which is just, it's like a huge call. The graphics look exactly like Day of the Tentacle era, but like obviously slightly updated, but not like they still have that same feel to them. But that style of gameplay, that style of humor, and all that. So that'll be coming out in the next year or so. And there's a few others that are still kicking around. So I think like it won't ever go away. But what you ends up getting is like, especially at that turnover point around Myst, is that like they started to realize, okay, this adventure idea is cool. But it's also very easily adaptable to anything. So you throw it into a Resident Evil game, you throw it into like Tomb Raider, you throw it into whatever, and then you get a better game. You know what I mean? Like Resident Evil could literally have just been running around the mansion killing things till you killed enough things.
I would go as far to say I don't think it would be as big as it is. If it was just
absolutely.
That.
It could, but I'm saying that that could have been all it was. And then it would have went on from there, like they could have just, but the extra level of that adventure game style, picking up, different items and remembering where they go and putting them in the right order and all that stuff, like that made it into what like the amazing game that it is, and the franchise that it is. And you know, so I think like adventure games as a genre, like after, you know, once the computing caught up and we could do stuff like, you know, like once, you know, like you get like a Quake and a Half-Life and you get these games where you can like move around a 3D space and manipulate things, like, you know, it became more obvious that like, well, let's just combine this with everything else, you know, and then it'll just make those games better, you know what I mean? Like, I mean that, you know, everybody talks about like how like in games like Half-Life or like Prince of Persia or whatever, is that like, you know, the fighting's fine or whatever, or the running out, shooting stuff's fine, but like solving some of those puzzles was like some of the more satisfying parts of those games, you know,
Always.
like Half-Life, where you're like picking things up with the gravity gun and you're, you know, placing things in a Portal. Perfect example is like, it's all puzzles and you're just trying to figure them out, and it's like a very satisfying experience. And so, you know, it was definitely like you know, easy to just be like, well, just mold it into everything. So sort of really, I mean, it's weird to say. I mean, adventure games had like this point where they sort of died out, but only in the sense that like these strict adventure games where there's nothing else going on in them, and they were like wildly successful, and then that happened in the 90s, but then it died off soon after Myst. But like, it made all of games that much richer because it added these elements to all of them.
I mean, and in 2017, that's what we expect from games. We really don't expect, unless it's a very specific thing like a 2D fighter or a sports game. You don't want a sports game to be a puzzle game.
No.
But if it's going to be an action game, you want adventure, you want puzzle too. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the series, but you look at something like Skyrim you mentioned, it's like a game can't just be like, oh, this is just an action game anymore.
Like it's just not RPG where you're just leveling up a character and moving around the world. It's like, no, you got to talk to people, you got to figure out what they want, you got to get it, you got to give it to them, you got to move things around the world. Like, that's like adventure. I mean, that's the
lasting
adventure.
impression from, you know, adventure games is.
Exactly.
And you know, I'm going to be honest, I never thought about it before when we sat down and talked about it, but it's like once you say it, it's so clear. Like, of course Myst is in all the games we played and all the games that came out like 2-3 years after that. Of course, even something like a Metal Gear Solid off the top of my head has like, you can clearly see that they're like, oh yeah, well, we're gonna put a bunch of different like cool puzzles in here, but you can also fight bosses, and it's like,
exactly.
you got to look at that unless you're really in the mood for like just adventure, which once in a while I must admit I am. It's a great thing to be like, oh, we can have both of these together. Exactly. And as you mentioned, it has a lot to do with current technology at the time. So wrapping up here, I would ask just one final question. If you were on a, you know, those desert island question, you're on a desert island and you can have whatever system or whatever you want, computer, whatever, and there's one adventure game. It is
probably Grim Fandango. I think would be my favorite game, and that could just be a nostalgia thing because it was like, I remember playing it when it came out. I started the remaster, but I haven't like sat down and gone through it again. I probably should, just because I played it so much when I was a kid. But I think that one's got to be up there with my top favorite for sure, because it was just such a, like, the world was amazing. I've ever since that game have been like a huge sucker for anything Day of the Dead related. You know, just that aesthetic. It's just like, and the humor in it was just spot on. But yeah, I think that would be probably my top adventure game of all time for sure.
You know, and that's one of those that I gotta check out. Maybe we can do that for like a Let's Play sometime.
Absolutely.
I mean,
I'll play all the adventure games.
I legitimately like, my only knowledge of that is like barely watching an LP and like knowing just there's a skeleton. That's literally all I know.
I would say I wonder. I'm curious. I mean, we could try it out. If playing through an adventure game where like, if I'm
somebody knows what's going on,
but like if I like, you know, that's the problem. Once you know an adventure game, you can play through it instantly. Like, you know, a lot of them, because you're just like going through the motions. It loses a lot of its like replayability in a sense. But I'm curious, like a lot of these games, if you guys haven't played through them, how much fun it would be if I'm directing it and like you guys are guessing at things while I like, you know, sort of slowly do them. And so then you guys can somewhat direct it by being like, oh, wait, are you supposed to do this and this and this? And it's like, yes.
Well, we did a similar but dumbed down thing with Until Dawn, if you remember, where I was like, make a decision. Remember, I was playing it and I made you guys make the decision, so...
Definitely.
Clearly dumbed down, comparatively, but
so something where it's like opening it up to you guys to try to solve these puzzles rather than me just telling you what the solutions are immediately, which, like, you know, is somewhat interesting sometimes, but at the same time, like, might be fun to like add that one extra layer of like something
to
watch
that would be
people
super
like
fun.
Figure it out or whatever. Might be fun, and then you get somewhat invested in it as the person watching it because you're like guessing at things, and then when you find out the answer, you're like, oh, you know. But like obviously, you know, because there'd be somebody playing it that knows everything, they could immediately stop you from going to. You know, that's the problem.
And getting
like,
frustrated, yes.
Right? Is like if you were LPing it like a first run through.
Oh my gosh!
There would be times where you'd just be like watching like somebody do the same dumb thing over and over till they figure it out. You know, like that's just happens with any adventure game. And sometimes with adventure games, your best bet is to just stop playing, walk away, and just let it mull over in your brain. Because there were plenty of times when I was playing like some of the text games where I would like hit a dead end. And just be like, I don't know what to do. Like I remember, especially there was an adaptation of Stephen King's The Mist, which was like so fun. But there was one part where I just was banging my head against the wall. I like did not know what to do, and then I just didn't play it for a while, and like you know just like went and did other stuff, whatever. And I remember like laying in bed and then being like, wait a minute, I have that bug spray. I wonder if I could use that on that. And then like I remember like once I thought of it, like I couldn't get back to the computer fast enough. Like, I was like, oh my god! And I got in, I tried it, and then it worked, and I was like, oh my god, I'm a genius.
Well, that's the best part of those games.
Yeah,
is figuring that out.
Just that satisfaction is just like, I'm so smart. You basically, it's like, I mean, I feel like every good adventure game makes you feel like you're the smartest person alive, and that you like have like done some great accomplishment, and it's just like, yes, you know, like, I mean, you want, as a game designer, you want to make a game that people find challenging, but you also want to make it to the point where people feel like very satisfied playing it, and so I feel like a lot of adventure games are really good at that, you know, so it scratches that itch.
Once you get through them, I absolutely agree. Well, I want to thank you once again, Parker, for joining us. We learned a lot today about adventure games.
Yeah.
And thank you.
We sure did.
And thank you out there in YouTube land for listening.